Hi, I'm Joe Saunders of Miniature Landscape Hobbies. In this episode, we're going to continue on from our last episode and finish building a model of the restaurant called Duck Street. If you didn't catch our last episode, be sure to check it out right here. In part 1 of this series, I talked about how my wife and I went to Cambodia on vacation in 2019. There we met a hard-working young man who aspired to be a chef. His name was Smey. Recently, Smey has opened up his own restaurant, Duck Street, selling barbecue duck. Now, I haven't eaten there yet, but I can hardly wait to. In fact, I can hardly wait to get back to Cambodia. Anyway, I thought I would surprise Smey by building a model of his food cart. So, last week, we set it all up, and I built the frame. This week, we're going to move ahead painting it and finishing the model off. So, how about you follow along, and let's finish building Duck Street. To start the painting process, I needed to prime the model. So, using my airbrush, I primed the whole thing with some black paint. I also did the chairs as well. After the primer had dried, I then went on to start adding color, first by spraying the model down with blue-gray, and then airbrushing on a lighter coat of light gray, focusing more towards the edges, and then finally dry brushing the whole thing with pure white in order to make the final highlights stand out. At this time, I also flipped the roof over, and since I'd already attached the ducks last time, I painted them in shades of brown and yellow. Not wanting the ducks to be lonely inside the cart, I went to Thingiverse and downloaded some files for some various vegetables and barbecue tools, and set them up to print off on my 3D printer. While I was waiting for the print job, I turned my attention to the chairs. First, I painted them with Hull Red, which is a very dark rust red. Then moved on to Flat Red to give them a bright red appearance. And lastly, mixed a couple drops of light flesh into the flat red and wet and dry brushed that on to form a highlight around the edges of the chairs. Turning my attention back to the base that I completed in the last episode, I took out some tan paint and heavily dry brushed it over the surface to bring out the texture. Following this, I then went on to a quick dry brush of light gray, followed by a dry brush of pure white. After you do this, the effects are kind of stark, so I went and took out some dry pigments, and using a stiff bristled dry brush, I worked them back into the surface of the cement. By now my vegetables and barbecue tools had finished printing, so I pulled them off the printer and then went ahead, cleaned them up, and painted them in various colors. The cabbages were painted green with yellow highlights, the carrots were painted yellow and orange, and the stalks of them were painted green. I also dry brushed the barbecue utensils with gunmetal. With the majority of the painting done with acrylics, I now needed to add some shading. So I sprayed the chairs and Duck Street itself down with some satin varnish, then taking out some enamel dark wash and thinning it out with some white spirits, I went ahead and lined everything in, following the cracks and the crevices and the edges of the panels in order to re-establish depth. I also did the same thing to the cracks between the concrete slabs on the base. After the enamel dried, I then took out my super glue and glued the vegetables and barbecue utensils into place inside the cart. Moving on to the windows, I took out a sheet of acetate and cut out the windows, sizing them to each pane on the side of the cart, and then installed them in place using Mod Podge. After that, I took the roof, put some Mod Podge around the inside, and stuck it down on top. Last week I showed the process where I downloaded the graphics for Smey's cart and put them in my graphics editor. This week I printed them off, and then, taking a sharp knife, I went in and cut them out. After I cut them out, I applied some Mod Podge to the face of each tile where the logo would go, and I pushed them into place. I smoothed them down with a plastic razor to make sure the fit was good. And with this step complete, the model was finished. I was pretty happy with how this model turned out. Of course, it's not as good as the real thing, but since it'll be a while before I'll be able to get back to Cambodia and see my friends, it'll have to do. If you're in Phnom Penh though, then you're lucky. How about you head on down to Duck Street? Knowing the way Smey cooks, you'll be glad you did. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Please stay tuned for new content twice weekly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Miniature Landscape Hobbies is your source for model building, miniature painting, and diorama content. If you've not yet subscribed, make sure you do, and press the bell button to receive immediate notifications so you do not miss out. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember to keep building life in miniature.